Ancient Rome was a patriarchal society where women didn't have equal rights or status as men. They were expected to be obedient and submissive to their fathers, husbands, or masters, and to fulfill their roles as wives, mothers, or slaves. If they dared to disobey or challenge the authority of men, they could face severe consequences such as torture, exile, or death. Here are some of the most bizarre and terrible punishments that Roman women faced for being disobedient. Flogging. Flogging was a common punishment that was used in ancient Rome for various offenses such as theft, adultery, or rebellion. It involved whipping or beating a person with rods, lashes, or scourges, which were leather straps with metal balls or hooks attached to them. The purpose was to inflict pain and humiliation on the person, as well as to deter others from committing the same crime. Flogging was also used as a form of discipline or correction for women who were disobedient or unruly to their fathers, husbands, or masters. One of the most famous victims of flogging was Lucretia, a noblewoman from early Roman history. She was raped by Sextus Tarquinius, the son of the last king of Rome, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. She reported the crime to her father and husband and then stabbed herself in the heart to preserve her honor. Her death sparked a revolt against the king and his family, which led to the establishment of the Roman Republic. Another victim of flogging was Agrippina the Younger, a powerful and ambitious woman from Imperial Rome. She was the sister of Emperor Caligula, the wife of Emperor Claudius, and the mother of Emperor Nero. She used her influence and connections to advance her son's career and secure his succession. However, she also clashed with him over his policies and affairs. Nero eventually ordered her death in AD 59. He first tried to kill her by sinking her ship, but she survived. He then sent soldiers to her villa and had them beat her with clubs until she died. Exile. Exile was another punishment that was used for various offenses such as treason, murder, or corruption. It involved banishing a person from their home and country and forbidding them from ever returning. The purpose was to deprive them of their rights and property, as well as to isolate them from their families and friends. One of the most famous victims of exile was Julia, the daughter of Emperor Augustus. She was married 3 times by her father's arrangement, but she also had many lovers and affairs. She was accused of adultery and treason by her father in 2 BC. He exiled her to an island called Pandateria, now Ventotene, where she lived in harsh conditions and under constant surveillance. She died there in 14 AD. Another victim of exile was Octavia, the sister of Emperor Augustus and the wife of Mark Antony. She was married to Antony in 40 BC as part of a political alliance between him and her brother. She bore him 2 daughters and tried to keep peace between him and her brother. However, Antony fell in love with Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, and divorced Octavia in 32 BC. He also declared war on Augustus. Octavia remained loyal to her brother and tried to mediate between him and Antony. After Antony's defeat and suicide in 30 BC, Octavia took care of his children by Cleopatra, who were spared by Augustus. She died in 11 BC. Burning. Burning was a rare punishment that was used in ancient Rome for some offenses such as incest, witchcraft, or sacrilege. It involved tying a person to a stake or a platform and setting them on fire with wood or straw. One of the most famous victims of burning was Vestal Virgins, the priestesses of the goddess Vesta, who were in charge of keeping the sacred fire burning in her temple. They were chosen from noble families at a young age and had to remain celibate for 30 years. If they broke their vow of chastity, they were burned alive. However, if they were accused of letting the fire go out, they were burned alive. Beheading. Beheading was a rare punishment that involved cutting off the head of a person with an axe or a sword. Beheading was also seen as a privilege or a favor for those who confessed or repented their crime. One of the most famous victims of beheading was Cicero's wife Terentia. She was married to Cicero, the famous orator and statesman, for 30 years. She bore him 2 children and supported him in his political career. However, she also had a strong and independent personality and often clashed with him over money and family matters. They divorced in 46 BC after Cicero accused her of being unfaithful and greedy. She remarried twice, but both her husbands died under suspicious circumstances. She was accused of poisoning them by Mark Antony, Cicero's army, who ordered her execution in 35 BC. She was beheaded at the age of 103. Another victim of beheading was Messalina, the wife of Emperor Claudius. She was married to Claudius in AD 38 when he was still a private citizen. She bore him 2 children and became his empress when he became emperor in AD 41. She used her influence and beauty to advance her interests and allies, as well as to indulge in her sexual appetites. She had many lovers and affairs, and even married one of them, Gaius Silius, while Claudius was away in AD 48. She hoped to overthrow Claudius and make Silius the emperor. However, her plot was discovered by Claudius's freedman Narcissus, who informed Claudius and persuaded him to order her death. She was beheaded in her gardens by a soldier while begging for her life. She was 25 years old when she died. Crucifixion. Crucifixion was a common punishment that involved nailing or tying a person to a cross or a pole and leaving them to die from exposure, dehydration, or suffocation. One of the most famous victims of crucifixion was Boudica, the queen of the Iceni tribe in Britain. She led a revolt against Roman rule in AD 60 after her husband Prothotagus died and left his kingdom to his daughters and Emperor Nero. The Romans ignored his will and seized his lands and wealth. They also flogged Boudica and raped her daughters. Boudica rallied her people and other tribes to fight against the Romans. They attacked and burned several Roman towns, including Londinium, now London, and Verulamium, now St. Albans. She killed thousands of Roman soldiers and civilians. However, she was defeated by the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinius at the Battle of Watling Street. She either died of illness or poison, or killed herself to avoid capture. The Romans crucified her daughters and many of her followers as a way of punishing them and crushing their rebellion. Another victim of crucifixion was Flavia Domitilia, the niece of Emperor Domitian and the wife of Flavius Clement. She was a Christian convert who followed the teachings of Jesus Christ, who was also crucified by the Romans. She was accused of atheism and Jewish sympathies by her uncle in AD 95. He exiled her to an island called Pandateria, now Ventotene, where she lived in poverty and hardship. He also executed her husband and many of her relatives and friends. She died there in AD 97. Her uncle also ordered that anyone who mourned her death would be crucified. Sewing. Sewing was a rare punishment that was used in ancient Rome for some offenses such as adultery, prostitution, or poisoning. It involved sewing up the mouth, vagina, or anus of a woman with a needle and thread. The purpose was to prevent them from speaking, having sex, or defecating, as well as to cause them pain and infection. One of the most famous victims of sewing was Locusta, a notorious poisoner from Imperial Rome. She was hired by several emperors and nobles to poison their enemies or rivals. She was also an expert in making and testing various poisons from plants and animals. She was involved in the deaths of Emperor Claudius, his son Britannicus, and Emperor Nero's wife Octavia. She was rewarded by Nero with lands and money, and even trained other poisoners for him. However, after Nero's suicide in AD 68, she was arrested and condemned by his successor Galba. She was sewn up in a sack with a rooster, a monkey, a snake, and a dog, and then thrown into the river Tiber. She died from drowning or from being bitten by the animals. Moreover, women in ancient Rome could be condemned for being too loud or rambunctious for societal norms. They were expected to be modest, quiet, and respectful in public, and not to cause any trouble or disturbance. Women who violated these norms could be labeled as scolds or shrews, which were terms for boisterous and dominating women who wouldn't relegate themselves to the role society assigned to them. To tame these women, the Romans invented some cruel instruments of punishment that aimed to silence their voices and restrain their movement. One of these instruments was the skull's bridle, which was a mask-like device which forced its wearer to have a sharp metal gag that would hold a tongue. Another instrument was the shrew's fiddle, which was a wooden contraption that locked its wearer's head and wrists in place. These instruments were often used in public places such as markets or streets, where the women would be exposed to ridicule and abuse from the crowd. These were some of the horrific punishments that Roman women faced for being disobedient. They show us the harsh and oppressive reality of life in ancient Rome, as well as the courage and resilience of women who defied or resisted it. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought about this topic. See you next time, and bye for now.